So we're learning Velo Sashbis Melach, which is long, as you can tell. The Maamar itself is 40 lines, 45 lines. But what's famous about this is the beard of Velo Sashbis Melach. And if you can see, it's hundreds of lines. And this is going to take a while, take a few weeks, if you will. And with Hashem's help, we're going to learn it. This is very famous. It's one of those Maimarim that is included in the Maamar Melukat of Likutei Torah. In other words, it's a Maamar that Bachrim learn. And it's an important Maamar. And it's more avoida than haskala. It's not like what we learned last summer, the Lahavin Mashakasa Be'etzes Chaim, which was so scholarly. This is much, much more to the heart. Many people learn only the beard and don't learn the actual Maamar of Velo Sashbis. But we're not going to do that. We're going to learn tonight the Maamar of Velo Sashbis, and we're going to set up the biur. And in essence, what we're going to discover is that there is life and there is the preservative of life, something which is not a part of life itself. It's outside the parameters of living, but it preserves life. In terms of the human being, it's the highest levels of the neshama. In this particular Maamar, it's salt. And in as much as the message of the Maamar is concerned, it's Chochmas HaKabbalah. Kabbalah is a part of Torah. Soid, the secret, the mystery of Torah is called Chochmas HaKabbalah. And in this Maamar, the preservative, the above life preserver of life in this context is that Chochmas HaKabbalah is going to preserve all of Torah and all of Yiddishkeit, although Chochmas HaKabbalah is above the living of Torah and Yiddishkeit, as you'll see in Mitzvah Hashem in the Maamar. But I want to step back and talk about Kabbalah. If I may make a suggestion, this is a personal suggestion. I'm sure there are many better sources for this idea. But there's a sefer called Shemer Emunim, written by Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, not Shemer Emunim, the Chassidishe Rebbe, but Shemer Emunim, who was a Talmud of the Yad Malachi, or the Rebbe of the Yad Malachi. He lived in times of the Baal Shem Tov. And he wrote a sefer Shemer Emunim. He has other Sfarim as well. The Rebbe quotes the Shemer Emunim in Likutei Torah. It's a small little sefer, and it's meant to be a psichet Kabbalah. It's meant to be an introduction to learning Kabbalah. There are a number of such svarim. The Ramak had a sefer called Oir Nerav, also a very simple sefer that's meant to be an introduction to Kabbalah, like a primer. And the sefer, Shemer Emunim, is also such a sefer, which introduces Chochmas HaKabbalah. If I recall correctly, the structure of the sefer is Sha'altiel and Mitartziel. It's a dialogue. It's an exchange between two people. The sefer was written by Rabbi Yosef Irgaz, and he writes it as a narrative. People asking questions and giving answers. Is Kabbalah true or is Kabbalah not true? And even if it's true, do I have to bother with it? And so forth. It's a Chassidishe sefer, Shemer Emunim. But what I want to suggest is that you read the introduction. The introduction, this is the newest prints. It came out in Tafshin Chav Hey. I forget at the moment the name of the Paltiel, but he has a wonderful introduction, a really wonderful introduction, which goes on for about 30 or 40 pages, if I recall correctly. And he summarizes the history of Kabbalah quite well and very honorably, in a very kosher way, in a very Yiddishkeit way. There's no kaltkeit, no doubt and skepticism in it. It's a truly, I guess I would use the word Chassidishe rendition of what the history of Kabbalah is. It's really well done. There's a lot of good information and good sources that are very helpful if you want to get a comprehensive, a quick, complete overview of the history of Kabbalah. It's a wonderful place to start. Now, of course, the beginning of the story is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Kibul Torah Mesinio Mesora. Included in the Mesorah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us is all levels of Torah. Pshat, Remez, Drush, Soid. Kol Masha Talmud Voslig L'Kadesh, Hakel Nitna L'Moshe Mesina. Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai received all the Torah on all levels, the simple level, the deeper level, the deepest levels, including Seid, Chochmas HaKabbalah. But of course we know that for hundreds and hundreds of years there's no written record of Torah Shebal Peh, like we had in the Parsha, Kisisa, that saves Zeis Sefer, you're only allowed to write Teresh B'Ksav down, and Teresh B'Peh you're not allowed to write down, so it was oral, it was passed along from ear to mouth, and so on. And for a very, very long time, Chochmas HaKabbalah was known by the Gedolei HaNeviim. There's no doubt they were all big Mukubalim. And they had a lot of Ruach HaKodesh. But it was a secret. A secret meant it wasn't necessarily known to the masses. Of course, the beginning of the record of Teresh B'Peh begins with the Targumim and the Mishnah and the Braisa. And in the world of Kabbalah, this is the Sefer Yetzirah, and there's also a Sefer called Sefer HaKana, and then, of course, the Sefer HaZeir. These are ancient Kabbalistic works written by Pashtus in the times of the Tanoim, although it's brought down that the Sefer Yetzirah is written by Avraham Avinu, the second day is written by Rabbi Akiva. I'm not getting into this. And Kabbalah takes on an official form, just like Halacha is recorded in the Mishnah, Kabbalah is recorded in the Sefer Yetzirah, it's recorded in the Zayir, and so forth. The difference between the record of Likutei Torah and the record of Kabbalah is that Likutei Torah was studied, developed further in the Mishnah, and then in the Gemara, and the Saberoy, and the Goinim, and the Rishonim, and so forth. And Kabbalah disappears. The Zayir disappeared. The Sefer Yetzirah Yidden always had, but the Zayir we didn't have until, depending on who you ask, either the times of the Goinim or the times of the late Rishonim, when the Zayir was discovered and copied and disseminated, and it made a big tumult. So it says in Sfarim, it's brought, for example, in the Shara Akdamas L'Harachav and others, that Yidden always had Kabbalah. But it was Echad Be'ir Shnayim B'Mishpach, it was very, very rare. I'm sorry, it was not known widely. There were always people who were masters of Chochmas HaSoid, Kabbalah. The generation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was exceptional. That Kabbalah was so widely studied, so easily, so readily available, that you have in the Zohar commentary from Yenuka and Yenuksa. Commentaries, ideas taught by little boys and little girls. That's how engaged the community of Yidden who were busy learning Torah were, that even Seid was available to even little boys and little girls, children. But when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai passed away and the Zayir was recorded, it was instructed to be hidden away, and it was hidden away for hundreds of years. It's hard to say how many hundreds of years. Like I said earlier, there's different opinions. The Chidah tells a story, and I believe that there is in some places a date attached to the story, which would be the year 1290, Hey Allah Nun, 5050, which is in today's terms 724 years ago. 5050, 1290. That it was a king in the Asia Minor who went treasure hunting, and he found this treasure, and he couldn't read it, and he brought the Chachamim, and the Chachamim said they don't understand it either, but that we sent to Spain, because in Spain people may be able to recognize it. And this, in fact, may be the secret level of Torah which Jewish people knew existed in the Lashon HaShas. It's called Maaseh Merkava and Maaseh Bereishis, but that had vanished, it had disappeared. And it was sent to Spain, and Rabbi Yehuda de Leon spent much of his life copying it and then disseminating it and so forth. This is the story. Now, tangentially, but I think tangents are sometimes quite more than a tangent, the fact that there is this record, I believe it's in the Akdama of the Shemin Amunim, where this date is brought. The Chidah tells the story, but he doesn't attach a year to it. I saw in one place the year Hey Allah from 1290. The reason I find it significant is because we know that whenever Yidden encounter new tzaras, there's also new Yeshua. The first country to expel the Jewish people from their lands were the British. And it was the year 1290. And there was not to be a Jew in England for 300 and something years. So it's incredibly significant that the very same year in another part of the world they found Pnimius HaTorah. In other words, when the tzara starts someplace else, Tzidkes B'Zeni Yisrael, some kind of a salvation is brought to the Klal Yisrael. In this case, it's the revelation of Pnimius HaTorah, of Zayir. When the Zayir emerged and came onto the scene, it made a huge hit. But it was a complicated hit. Many people ate it up ravenously, like this great treasure. Others were very skeptical, and others were outright opposing it, fighting against it, saying that it wasn't Torah, that it was medieval mythology, and so on. I want to give you a sense of the kind of controversy that happened when the Zohar was discovered. Let's go back to the beginning, okay? There is a Ravid on the Rambam who says that there were Jews who were Gedolim v'Tovim, greater and better than the Rambam himself, that holchu b'zu hashita, that had a shita that said that Hashem has a body like parts. Why would somebody so intelligent that he's Godel v'Tovim in HaRambam say something so foolish? They read the psukim, and the psukim describe Hashem as having an ability to speak, and to see, and to feel, and to regret, and to raise his hand. So they took the psukim literally. Hashem has a body. And the same is true with the Maamar Chazal. The Rambam, of course, writes that if you believe God has any kind of a body, you're an apokadis. And the Rambam Ravid pounces on him and says, "Excuse me, Rambam." There were wonderful Jews who believed this on the Munah Pshut. Now, of course, all of us know that the halacha is like the Rambam. You're not allowed to believe, God forbid, that Hashem has a body. But this little exchange reveals something very important. What it reveals is that you could be the smartest person in the world, but if there's an area of chokhmah that you do not pursue, you will be ill-equipped. You will be unprepared to deal with questions that come up that relate to that chokhmah. You must understand that in the Jewish tradition, there was a rule that said, Ein Derishin. You don't ask questions. Not you don't give answers, you don't ask questions. You don't ask, what is God? You don't ask what came before the universe or after the universe. How old is God? You don't ask. Ein Derishin. And Mina Pshita, as they say in some cultures, simple faith. For hundreds of years, that's how Jews lived. They lived this way in times of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, in the time of the Bayis Rishon, they had prophecy. They had inspiration, so they knew godliness. But the Jewish people, in their tmimus and their wholeness and their sincerity, didn't question. They learned Torah, they didn't question. The questioning came from outside. The questioning came from the philosophies and the philosophers, which were, of course, very popular in Europe, and then in Asia Minor, the Near East, as it's called, and so on, amongst the Greeks, and then later on amongst the Romans, and the Egyptians, and then finally the Muslims. And these people began to ask theological questions. What does God look like? How old is God? How many children does he have? I mean, I'm saying these questions tongue-in-cheek because I don't mean them literally, but the theological questions that the Mishnah says, Ein Deishim, the Jewish people were not Irish, people began to provoke. And of course, this created a terrible unsettlement in the Jewish community because Jewish people were, to some degree, integrated, assimilated with their neighbors. And here were questions being asked, and they were completely ill-equipped to answer them. Completely ill-equipped. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they never studied. They did not engage in the study of theology and philosophy and mysticism at all. And Mina Pshita, that was it. And there was a vacuum of knowledge into which many Jewish people fell. These questions, these provocations, these doubts, this cynicism, this what's called the ba'apam hargu ish, you kill a man by making a funny face with your nose. Al Yevish Ibn Maligim took its toll. And of course the Gedali so reacted. Rasag, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the Rambam, and so on, wrote svarim of philosophy to answer these questions. In other words, questions that Jewish people simply never asked. And because they never asked them, they didn't need any answers. Because of the outside influence, it became necessary for Torah to speak and to explain its theology, not because Torah wanted to reveal these kinds of things, but because its hand was being forced by Lahavdil, the Goyish world, and as a consequence, these Sfarim were written. And they began to ask questions that philosophy asks, that theologians ask, that from Jews don't ask, because we're supposed to be Tomim, Tihya, Ima Desham Elekecha. Like I said to you before, how does God look? How old is God? How many children does he have? And so on. And they answered these questions in very profound ways. And of course, one of the very, very basic issues that's addressed in these Sfarim is the question of anthropomorphism. The idea that so much of the Torah and the Chazal seem to describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu in human terms, if he's a person who has hands and he has feet and he has eyes and he has ears and he has a mouth and he has moods and he has regret and he has depression and he has anger. And the Jews traditionally never questioned. And this is what the Ravid meant when the Ravid said, if it says in the Torah hand, it must mean a hand. How is a hand? I don't know. I have an answer. I don't have a question. That's what Torah says. The Goyim forced us to have to think more deeply into these questions. Theology, philosophy, and so forth. And the Gedolei Yisrael, the Gedolei Chamim, our holiest rabbis, wrote Sfarim to provide clarity. And in one sentence, you can summarize so much of what Chochmas HaMechker attempted to do in explaining the theology of God in an intelligent way. And that phrase is Dibra Torah K'loshen B'nei Adam. The Torah speaks in the language of man. In other words, Dibra Torah K'loshen B'nei Adam means everything is allegory. It's all mashal. Hashem doesn't have a mouth, and Hashem doesn't speak, and Hashem doesn't have eyes, and Hashem doesn't have ears. He still doesn't have moods and regret, and anger and depression. These are simply metaphor. If a human being would be under these conditions and would react in this way, we would say he's angry. So we say that God is angry, even though all he's doing is acting angry. When a human being under these conditions would withdraw from a certain engagement, from a certain endeavor, certain project he's undertaken, so Kvayachal, the Eibishter, also withdraws. But it doesn't chas v'sholem mean that he has eyes, and he has ears, and that he has arms, and that he has legs. It's all metaphor, because in fact, the Torah describes God in human terms, so that people should be able to relate to him, and be able to relate to his relationship with us. But in truth, it's not real. This insight, which is really a Gemara originally, is philosophy's way of dealing with all of the questions that seem to describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu as complex, as not simple, as not plain, as not infinite, not as absolute, and so on. So you have to understand the history that I just shared with you to appreciate what happened when Kabbalah shows up. At one point, we don't know what Jewish people believed, but the Ravid suggests that G'deilim v'tevim b'cholcho b'zu hashita. If it says in the Torah hands, it means hands. It says in the Torah eyes, it means eyes. Not because they were heretics, but because they never studied it. They took it for granted. You just believe it. Then, because of a goyish attack, so to speak, Gedolei Yisrael wrote Sfarim to explain God and angels and prophecy and afterlife and reward and punishment in an intelligent way, in a philosophical way. And what did the philosophers say about God Almighty? Parsha b'tachas hapshita is absolutely plain. He has no form. And all the allusions in Torah and Chazal that suggest God does have a form is all metaphor. So what you have to appreciate is the Jews spent a very, very long time creating a philosophy that was logical in terms of how it defined God, or to say it more accurately, that was logical in terms of how it defined that God cannot be defined. Okay? And then Kabbalah shows up. And Kabbalah reintroduces faculties, koiches, 10 spheres, shleisha levushim. All of a sudden God has parts again. In other words, everything that philosophy attempted to undo in terms of people's corporeal sense, physical sense, body-like sense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the philosophers tore us away from that, introduced us to the concept of Dibra Torah K'loshen B'nei Adam. Along comes Kabbalah and says, no, there's Chesed Yamina, Chesed is the right hand, Gvura is the left hand, Teferet is Gufa, Teferet is the body, and so on. So the timing of the emergence of Kabbalah at the end of philosophy asserting itself to provide clarity and insight to the Jewish people to be able to deal with the challenges of the time, along comes Kabbalah and has a whole new challenge. Because Kabbalah does speak of parts, spheres, and it becomes very, very complicated and very, very involved to understand fully how Kabbalah works. And I want you to know the rule. The rule is that the earlier Kabbalists describe Sfidus and the Midas, Halyenis in the most physical of terms, like offices of a king and so on. The later Mekubalim, beginning with Arizal and so on, began to fine-tune, use finer language. But earliest Kabbalists speak in Kabbalah, and they describe Chesed as being a right hand, Gvura as being a left hand. And of course, this doesn't Chas v'Shalom mean that the Kabbalists held that Chesed is a right hand. It means that the Kabbalists took for granted that you'll understand that this is Lahaiti Dvarim mi Pashtusan and Magash mi Yusan, that it cannot mean that Hashem has an actual arm, it means only the idea of a midah of Chesed and so on. The later Mekubalim were much more careful to choose language that will lend itself to pshitas, that will not be able to be misconstrued as though there's more than one God, there are many gods, Rahman al and so forth and so on. So Kabbalah comes into the equation at a relatively late date, when philosophy has been dealing with the theological questions and has provided a basis, a method of defending Yiddishkeit and explaining Yiddishkeit that has an appeal and that's encouraging to all kinds of nevuchim, as the Rebbe calls them, who are young or who are old, who are curious and want to know. Then comes Kabbalah and in effect turns the plate back over and says, no, you went away from Tzir to Pshitas, go back from Pshitas to Tzir. You went away from seeing Hashem as having a form because you saw Pashti Aksuvim, to appreciating the simplicity of God in truth. And any form to the contrary is Dibbetetic Lashon the other, all of a sudden you, the same person, comes along with Chachmas HaKabbalah, says, no, there's Sfiras, Chesed, Drei Yemina, Gvura, Drei Smala, and so on. And of course, consequent to this, because of this, we read in the name of the Holy Baal Shem Tov, in Derech V'Tsecha, and Sheresh Mitzvah Tefillah in the beginning, Perek Beis, I believe, that also Lilmed Chachmas HaKabbalah. The Baal Shem Tov said you shouldn't learn Kabbalah. Now, could you imagine that? The Baal Shem Tov, whose whole mitzvah is Pnimiyus HaTorah, says, don't learn Chachmas HaKabbalah, and the Baal Shem Tov explains why. He's afraid that people are going to be magashim ideas, they're going to relate to these ideas, and Sfiras and Midas, as physical, and or at least complex, and they're going to take away from the pshitas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Baal Shem Tov of all people, who is one of the anchors of Sait, says, don't learn Kabbalah. Kabbalah is going to confuse you. Now the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, on the Maamar Sheresh Mitzvah Tefillah, addresses this, should you or shouldn't you learn Kabbalah, and essentially he combines two ideas, the theological, the philosophical idea with the mystical. It's a long story, it's not for now. But the bottom line is, the fact that we worry, that we concern ourselves, that we wish it would be better if we didn't engage in the learning of Chachmas HaKabbalah says something very important. Why? Why are we afraid of Kabbalah? Why do people shy away from it? Why this aversion to it? What is it about Kabbalah that makes us all so nervous? And of course, the answer that the Baal Shem Tov would give is because you're afraid of imagining a God with 10 gods, Rahman al and 10 spheres, 10 lights that come from one HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one Eibishter. And therefore, it was preferred that people shouldn't learn Kabbalah altogether. But there's another issue. And the other issue is that as much Kabbalah as you're going to learn, you will always remain unclear. Learning Kabbalah is, as we call it in our culture, Yediyas HaMetzias. When you study Kabbalah, you know about God. You never meet Him. When you study Kabbalah, you know about Sfiras. You never see them. When you study Kabbalah, you learn about Eid Ein Sof. You never experience it or encounter it. So you're dealing with unfamiliar things that you don't know. Because they're things that you don't know, even what you know is called Yediyas HaMetzias. You know that it exists. You don't have a clarity which is Yis Alakus B'Muchash, they can see it vividly. So this is another aspect. The first thing is the Baal Shem Tov says, don't learn Kabbalah because you don't want to imagine a God with many gods, Rahman al. The Eidel Inyan is, even if a person engages in Chachmas HaKabbalah, and he is in a position to appreciate the ruchnias within the gashmias, and the pshitas within the tzir, and the ein sof within the gavul. And as a consequence, he doesn't have a material, corporeal concept of Kabbalah. He has an ideal and a correct concept of Kabbalah. But he never fully understands. The very nature of Chachmas Kabbalah is that you never fully understand it. Even what you understand, you don't understand completely. It's called Yediyas HaMetzias and not Asagas HaMahus. And I've shared this with you in the past. That the Rebbe once explained the Gemara that says, Ein Magal Razei Teda, Elamisha Li B'Deig B'Kirbi. You're not allowed to reveal the secrets of the Teda to anyone unless they're Li B'Deig B'Kirbi. They're a person who's full of Daiga from Yiras Hashem, fear of God Almighty. And the question is asked, everybody learns Kabbalah today. What do you mean, Ein Magal Razei Teda, Elamisha Li B'Deig B'Kirbi? As a Chazal statement, people learn Kabbalah today who are not even from. So what is the meaning of Ein Magal Razei Teda, Elamisha Li B'Deig B'Kirbi? So this is an incredible answer. Li B'Deig B'Kirbi doesn't mean from tshuva. Li B'Deig B'Kirbi means from the limud, from the learning of Kabbalah. When you learn Kabbalah, you're frustrated. Why? Because as much as you understand, it's only ruchnis, idiyas hamtzias. So it's not the pshat, some people are libam deig and some people are not libam deig, and you're only allowed to teach Kabbalah to those who are libam deig and not teach Kabbalah to those who are not libam deig. But don't forget, any person who's going to learn Pnimis HaTeira, the limud itself is going to create the dayeg, because as much as you understand, you don't fully understand. So Kabbalah is a great attraction. But if you take it seriously and you do it right, it leaves with an incredible frustration, if you will, that as much as you understand, you don't understand. This Maamar is about Kabbalah. It's a short little Maamar, right? The beard is keeping us busy for a while. The Maamar is a page. What the Maamar says about Kabbalah is it places it within the scheme of Yiddishkeit and places it within the scheme of learning Torah. In other words, instead of asking what is Kabbalah, the question is what is Kabbalah's role? By asking the question what is Kabbalah's role, naturally you're also asking the question what is Kabbalah? But it's a bit different. In other words, the Maamar is not going to say what is Kabbalah about and start talking about Svidus and Eilevus and Ein Sof. But what is its contribution to Jewish life and to the study of Torah? And the answer is going to be that it's the kav chumtin, it's the preservative. It's what keeps everything fresh. Our Maamar is going to discuss salt and use salt as a metaphor. Salt does many, many wonderful things. Salt has very interesting effects on foods that you mix it with and so on and so forth. What's ironic is salt is so helpful in adding taste and flavor to food, and salt itself is tasteless. In other words, it's a contributor to so much else that goes on in our lives, and it itself is sort of above it, it's removed. And the argument of the Maamar that Chachmas HaKabbalah is no different, that its role in the scheme of Yiddishkeit is not that it provides flavor, but that it extracts flavor from everything else. And I think we should learn the Maamar. I don't want to give it all away, but this is where we're headed. This is the direction we're going in. Now, of course, the reason I gave this lengthy introduction, besides the fact that I wanted to give this introduction, is because what this introduction impresses is A, the controversy of Kabbalah, and B, Kabbalah is one of those things that even when you have it, you don't have it. It's always a bit elusive. So let's learn. The Pasuk says, Velo Sashbis Melach v'Gemer, that there's never allowed to be interruption to salt. The Beis HaMikdash had to have salt. It's a very, very interesting thing. It's called Bris Melach. Hashem made a covenant with salt. How many brises do you have in the whole Chumash? How many covenants did the Eibishter make? The Eibishter made a Bris Melach, a covenant with salt. It's one of the most ironic things of all, a covenant with salt. Now, of course, you know what Chumash Rashi says, that the waters were separated, and the higher waters were raised up, and the lower waters were lowered. So the lower waters complained and cried, Anan, Be'inan, Lamhevi, Kalamaka, Kadisha. We want to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Eibish's answer is, I'm going to include you in every korban. And that's why the Pasuk says, Al kol korbancha takriv melach. Every korban has salt. But it's a very limited explanation. There's got to be more, greater depth to why salt is called a bris. Now, incidentally, on my website, inside Chassidus.org, I have a class. I believe I have a class on Vayikra, in my Parsha section, on this pasuk of Velo Sashbis Melach, Bris Melach. And of course, one of the things that we know about salt is that it has opposite effects. Salt is death itself. There's no life in salt. On the other hand, salt preserves. Salt keeps things. Salt represents complete death, and salt represents the idea of longevity, of never dying, never drying out, never becoming useless. And these contradictions enlighten what's unique about salt and the place of salt and the mashal of salt, if you will, in Avodas Hashem. So the Rebbe begins, Hine, Melach uneisen tam b'dvarim hanimlachim bay. Salt flavors everything, all foods that you salt. Mehabasa like meat. Now, of course, some people put salt on meat so they should taste the salt. It's like some people put ketchup on fries, they should taste the ketchup. That's because the meat tastes terrible and they don't know how to eat. When you put salt on food, you're not putting salt on food, you should taste the salt. You're putting salt on food so you should taste the food. In other words, salt is not a flavor. Salt extracts the flavor from the foods that you're salting. The Gemara says in Berachos. The Gemara says, and he brings the pasuk, will you eat tefel? Tefel means bland, tasteless food without salt. In other words, on line 3, when you have no salt, the meat is tasteless, it's bland. It has no flavor. And when you add salt to the food, even if it's a very small amount of salt, the flesh, the meat, becomes tam, tasty. The meat sweetens, the salt sweetens the meat. Now, of course, sweetening here doesn't mean that the meat by itself is sour, but that the meat by itself is bland. It doesn't have a flavor. And the little bit of salt that you put on extracts the tam from within the food. You see, the Maamar uses a very, very physical form to discuss salt. The physical form is food and taste and flavor. In Chassidus, tam, taste and flavor is connected to the highest level. Tam va'oinig. Let me give you an example. The Sefer Torah has 4 levels. The lowest level is the oisius, the actual written letters. The second level is the tagim, is the crowns that are represented by one-dimensional lines. The third dimension is the nekudas, the vowels that don't appear on the written page, but they have to be used when you read, when you pronounce what's written there. And the highest madrega is taimim. Taimim in this case means the melody, the musical notes, which is not written in full form, it's not even written in a hint, and it's not even necessarily pronounced when you read it. It's the tam, it's the music that is sung with the words as you read the Torah. And according to Kabbalah and Chassidus, Taimei HaMikra, the trop, has the highest shadish, represents the highest thing. When you talk about physical food, and you say that there's the flavor of the food, there's the food without flavor, and the food with flavor, that physical metaphor is representing this madrege, the taimim, the gishmak, and in Kabbalah language, the light of the Torah, which is the most elusive and the least available, is brought forward through salt. Salt brings out tam. If you don't have flavor, if you don't have salt, you have no flavor. It's the same food. It provides the same nourishment. It'll keep your body and your soul together. But to enjoy the food, you need a little bit of salt. And in spiritual terms, this flavor represents the most elusive level of godly experience or spiritual experience, of Jewish experience that whatever salt represents brings forward. And the Rebbe observes, I'm on line 4, the salt itself is tasteless. Or to say it alternatively, it doesn't taste very good, right? Unless you're 3.5 and have a salt craving. Nevertheless, the idea that salt flavors isn't that the salt is the flavor, but it falls out of the food, that you salt the natural taste that food has. Now, what's the logic to this? What is the idea that I have food and it has latent or potential juices or taste which is not fully brought forward? And when I put a little salt on it, I'm not going to taste the salt. The salt is going to help me taste the natural flavors of the food that I have salted. What's the significance of this? What's the mysticism of this? In other words, how do you explain how salt helps bring flavor out of something else and salt itself doesn't have a flavor? So the Rabbi explains the Kabbalah as follows. Salt comes from Gevura. Gevura is strength, is severe. Gevura cuts, Gevura divides, Gevura contains. But you know what else Gevura does? It perfects. Gevura insists on things being perfect. Chesed is more liberal, Gevura is exact. Salt comes from Gevura. But he adds another word, Abba. Gevura is the Abba. Salt is the exactitude of Sfiras HaChochma. Comes from the Midas HaChochma, Sfiras HaChochma, but in Chochma itself, it's the Gevura of Chochma. Now, what do we know about Chochma? What do we know about Chochma? What do we know about Chochma, right? We know Chochma has the flash. What we know about Chochma is that we don't know that much about Chochma, right? That's true. In other words, when a person struggles with an idea and is enlightened with a eureka moment, with a clarity from the subconscious to the consciousness, an idea emerges. That enlightenment, that flash, is rich, exciting, and has a lot of promise. You hope to take that flash, process it, and be able to develop new ideas or new methods, new systems of reasoning, and so on and so forth. But in the flash, it's all vague. In the flash, it's all not yet known. It's not yet clear. The most meaningful thing about the flash is its prospect, its excitement, its positiveness, what could come from the flash. It's only when you begin to dissect it and you analyze it and take it apart, when you lose that richness, that you begin to actually make that chokhmah, enlightenment, useful and permanent and lasting. Right? That's the flash of chokhmah. So think about this. If the flash of chokhmah is not thorough by itself, and is not clear by itself, and is not preservable by itself, until you develop it in Bina, you would have to admit that chokhmah is something which is unclear, right? Well, guess what? Chokhmah has gevura. What does that mean, chokhmah has gevura? Chokhmah has a certain exactitude, a certain preciseness. In that flash, which is all vague, and I'm not sure what I have, and I'm not going to know what I have till I analyze it and I develop it. When I analyze it, when I develop it, when I bring it into Bina, I'll know what the chokhmah was much better. I'll have more grounded access to the information that this enlightenment brought forward. But in the chokhmah itself, it's all very vague. Says the Maamar, guess what? This chokhmah that you don't know has a certain exactness, a certain exactitude that cannot be even transmitted to Bina. In other words, the vague flash of chokhmah has a clarity and a truth that cannot be compromised, that's stronger than Bina. In other words, there's something very ironic about chokhmah. What's ironic about chokhmah is that chokhmah is, you'll see momentarily, chesed. Chesed means chokhmah is a gift. It offers you something. It offers you something that still needs processing and developing in Bina. But in addition to the chesed offering of chokhmah, there's a gevura offering of chokhmah. What the gevura offering of chokhmah is, it's called in Kabbalah Bina Nekutei Torah. Nekutei Torah means that when you start learning and you start analyzing, you can get carried away. And the getting carried away can mislead you. And it can take you away from the truth. So you have the Chochmah in the Bina. That although the Chochmah is vague, and the Chochmah by itself you don't understand very well, you're not even sure what you have, the Chochmah will never let you to go astray. It preserves you. It keeps you in the right place. Because ironically, in this haze, in this fog, in this lack of clarity, there is an integrity. That integrity is called the Gevura of Abba. That integrity will always keep you correct. Now there's also the Chesed of Abba. The Chesed of Chochmah is the information, is the enlightenment, is the stuff that you're going to now develop. The Gevura of Abba is going to make sure it stays honest. Salt is a product of water. The heat of the sun, which bakes down on the waters, that's how salt emerges. Now I'm not sure a chemist would be comfortable with this version of how salt emerges. Where the salt comes from? Salt comes from the sunlight on the water. It's a compound that the Eibishter created that exists in the world, and it makes itself into the seawater because of whatever processes, I don't know. Here he describes it as a philosophical, as a mystical idea. The reason salt water is salty is because the sun is baking down on the water, and the heat of the sun represents Gevura. It shows itself in the water in the form of salt. So I don't think that this is a chemical explanation for how salt appears in water, although it may be. But it's a metaphysical explanation. It's a spiritual explanation. In other words, the water as we see it, the water of the sea as we see it, is a creation of the Eibishter. That is a combination of water and salt. The reason it's a combination of water and salt because there's a chesed influence and there's a gevura influence. The gevura influence has to do with heat, and I guess the chesed influence would have to do with moisture and something which is cool, and the heat and the dryness that affects the water adds the gevura element which shows itself in the form of salt. Umayim, and the water within the water, who bechinas chesed shebechachma, is the kindness of chachma. V'hamelach zel bechinas gevuras, the salt will be the gevura aspect of the chachma, which is why it's sharp. So what's the Maamar telling us? Chachma in its haze gives you something, that's chesed, and chachma in its haze preserves. There's an exactitude. You're not going to be able to go astray so long as your intellect is bound to your chokhmah. If you disconnect your chokhmah from your bina and you become an analyzer and a thinker and a creator of ideas, and you go away from that initial point of truth that the chokhmah flash gave you, you can go off what's called in Chassidus derech hakalasan. You can end up who knows where. But the chokhmah, notwithstanding how vague it is, has a gevura quality that keeps you. The Rebbe says, "V'hine mivuar beitz chaim," it says in Kabbalah, "Shemegvur is the Abba nas v'chasadim the Ema." That the fact that we just explained, that Chochmah has two qualities: the generous quality of Chochmah, the idea that Chochmah gives, and the controlling quality of Chochmah, the exacting quality of Chochmah, which is what the Gevura of Abba gives. You should know the Gevura of Chochmah is in Bina Chesed. In other words, the idea that in Sfiras HaChochmah there's an aspect that controls and that limits and that keeps exact is in the Sfiras HaBina very, very generous. What that means is that when you keep something right, you find greater truth. Right? If you're learning something and you ask a question and you come up with an answer and the answer is distorted, the answer is messed up, but you think the answer is correct, it's a dead end. If you have a question and you give an answer and you show what's faulty with that answer and you come up with a better answer, that exposure of the flaw of the first answer is a kindness, it's a generosity. The gevura of Chochmah is chesed and bina. In other words, to the intellectual realm of understanding, the exactitude of Chochmah, to use a term for 4 or 5-year-olds, the meanness of Chochmah is an incredible kindness. The meanness, the exactness of Chochmah keeps the Bina true, and by keeping the Bina true, the Bina's ideas flow, because they're not going to become distorted and blocked, held up by mistakes and by errors. Pirush, in other words, In the realm of Chokhmah, the Gevura aspect of the Chokhmah is not the generous aspect. It's the controlling aspect. It's the exacting aspect. Im kol zeh, nevertheless, kishenim shacham liyema, when Chokhmah comes into Bina, nechshavim bechinas chasadim legabo. What it gives Bina is kindness. What it gives Bina is kindness. And we all understand why. When you control a situation, when you limit a situation, you give it health. And when you give it health, you give it productivity. So the Rebbe says, V'neida, we know, shakola taimim nimshacham chokhmah. I mentioned to you earlier the idea of flavor and taste. And I expressed to you that flavor and taste is a very deep mystical idea. And then the realms of words, we have taimim, you have asius, and you have tagim, and you have nekudis, and you have taimim. The highest level of words is the melody, the geshmak, the richness of those words, the tam, which is of course a concept in Kabbalah. So the Rebbe says all tam comes from Chokhmah. Every type of flavor, every type of richness, every type of transcendent enlightenment comes from Chokhmah. Ki taimim hem b'shem ab, because of the four levels of asius and tagim and nekudes, taimim come from the madrega of ab, which is the highest madrega, which is the idea of Chokhmah. You see, what tam means is, think about it in very simple terms. If you eat food and the food has no taste, you don't suffer at all. If you eat food and the food has a taste, you're not nourished anymore. It's the chemical compounds and the biological compounds, whatever else you need out of food is the same whether you taste it or you don't taste it, right? But then you have, of course, the idea that the Gemara brings, Shmor tev t'tasha notzim. Something gives you pleasure, makes you fat. You don't get fat from eating cholesterol. You get fat from eating food that gives you pleasure. It affects you physically. Like it's brought in the Hayem Yem that Reb Nachum Chernobyl was fat from saying Omen Yesh Merabah because he enjoyed it so much. So pleasure, which adds nothing, taste, which adds nothing to the substance, changes. It becomes a whole different experience. And this different experience is the highest level of what you're engaged in, and it comes from Chokhmah. And we're now learning that specifically it comes from the Gevura of Chokhmah. It doesn't come from the generous aspect of Chokhmah. It comes from the controlling aspect of Chokhmah, from the Gevura of Chokhmah. V'lachein HaMelech, therefore salt, sheshorosh, mebechinas abed, comes from Chokhmah. And I said a moment ago, specifically the Gevura, the controlling aspect of Chokhmah, hu hanei sein tam b'davar hanimlach, it gives flavor to what you salt. Now comes the controversy. I'm on line 11. And salt itself is tasteless. It's Chokhmah, which is altogether a haze and a fog. And specifically, it's the Gevura of Abba. It's not even the generosity of Chokhmah. It's not even the flash. It's what keeps you from getting lost of Chokhmah. So it provides everybody and everything with taste, with flavor, with tainug, with gishmak, and it itself is above all of those things. Lachein, therefore, lefi shomeh bechinas Gevura, since it is associated with Gevuras and Gevuras of Chokhmah, ein beit tam, it's tasteless. Aval at the same time, harei bechinas Gevuras Yabba, from the Gevura of Chokhmah, which is the keeper, the holder, nasim chsadim the ema, in Bina. The fact that the Gevura of Chokhmah keeps the Bina from going astray becomes an event of generosity. It brings out the full prospect of the Bina, including the Tam and the Tainug of Bina. V'zeu shematim habasa, which is the significance of giving flavor to meat. So this is the first concept of salt, or the first way of explaining the concept of salt. Salt comes from Gevura of Abba. Because it comes from Gevura of Abba, it's the mean guy. I'm going to keep you in the straight and narrow. I don't want you to get confused and lost. But that Gevura in Bina is sweetening. The constraint that Gevura creates in Bina causes the light and the richness of ideas in Bina to flow, and it adds the tam and the tainug. Just like physically, salt adds flavor to food, but not that the salt is the flavor, but that the salt brings flavor out of the food. V'oid. Now we're on line 16. There's another concept. Another reason why it is that we say that salt is Gevura the Abba, and it provides flavor for everything else, and itself it doesn't have any taste. It's aligned with the mystical concept of Chokhmah creating clarity. Chokhmah is the one who affects clarity in all things that need to be clarified. And of course, what's the effect of clarity? To disentangle the entanglements of good and evil. Right? The Rebbe brings in one of his sichos, a famous quote, that he says that since Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there's no such thing as pure good, there's no such thing as pure evil. Every good has evil and every evil has good. And of course, that's the challenge of life. The reason life is challenging is not because we live in a world of good and evil, but we live in a world where you're not sure what is good and what is evil. It's all mixed together. And of course, we all thrive and wish we had clarity. We knew what's good and what's bad, what's good in each situation, what's bad in each situation. One clarity. The clarity comes from Chokhmah, not from Bina. In other words, you don't have clarity from understanding things. You have clarity from having good instincts, which is what Chokhmah is. My analytical mind can understand, but it can also explain anything. It can make evil into good and good into evil. What keeps it true and clear is Chokhmah, because Chokhmah doesn't get that involved in understanding. Chokhmah remains apart and has a certain innate clarity, and it sends its clarity, it imposes its clarity on everything else. The way it's explained in Chassidus is the following. For something to create clarity in something else, it must be within itself absolutely clear. In other words, if you're entangled, you cannot disentangle somebody else's mess. Metaphysically speaking, psychologically speaking, spiritually speaking. If you are able to give clarity to somebody else, it's because you have clarity. And as Chassidus and Kabbalah will explain, you have absolute clarity. Absolute clarity does not mean developed clarity. If I was confused yesterday and I'm clear today, my clarity is good for me. But for me, to be able to give to you clarity is only if my clarity is absolute. It was always clear. It was not entangleable, and therefore does not need to be disentangled. That's what Chokhmah is beridu. Chokhmah creates clarity, not just because Chokhmah is clear, but that the nature of the clarity of Chokhmah is that it's not subject to being unclear. That's the gevuras of Chokhmah. You see, we said before that the gevuras of Chokhmah keep you, they hold you, they keep you in the straight and narrow. Here we're saying something a little bit more. The gevur of Chokhmah in every situation immediately senses where the truth is. He just takes things apart, but not by analyzing, by getting his hands dirty, but from an instinctive, distant way. That's the meaning of the word, B'chokhmah is beridu. Now you'll learn in Chassidus that B'chokhmah is beridu is complicated, because Chokhmah doesn't do birur, because it's removed. To do birur, you have to be mislabish v'makam hamizbar. You have to go to the entanglement and disentanglement. So the birur is not done by Chokhmah, it's done by Bina, it's done by Midas, it's done by people's hands and feet who sit in caves and look for pieces of gold and diamond. But b'chokhmah is beridu. In other words, any clarity which will be affected at any point in Seder Ishtalshlus is because in that point in Seder Ishtalshlus there is Chokhmah there. Chokhmah descends into each step of Seder Ishtalshlus. And because in Chokhmah there's absolute clarity, because of the Chokhmah that exists in Bina, because of the Chokhmah that exists in Chassid and Gevura, because of the Chokhmah that exists in Malchus, they are able to to bring clarity to the world around themselves, because they have within themselves a nugget, an essence, or as you'll see soon, he's going to use the expression, the idea of a catalyst that's itself disengaged, but is invested enough to allow for clarity to come from it through the tool, through the Bina, through the Midas, through the Malchus, to bring clarity to the world around itself. That's what B'chokhmah beridu means. I'm reading again this line 16. Chokhmah brings clarity to all things. To disengage good from evil when it's entangled and complicated. And he explains. For example, a human being who undertakes to separate food from waste or waste from food. Whatever you have more of, you're going to remove. If you separate nuts from shells, the nuts are not making the separation. The shells are not making the separation. You are. You're neither nut nor shell. Simple as that. You're removed from the entanglement, you can see it, and therefore you can disentangle it. The removal of the person from the entanglement allows him to disentangle it. When you make cheese, the process of making cheese is separating certain aspects of the milk out so that what's useful becomes gevina and the rest spills out, goes away. You isolate what is good food for the creation of gevina from what is waste. From the fat and from the whey, I guess it's called, v'nasa gevina, to produce cheese. V'hainu, what causes this separating out the good or the bad in the milk and so on to produce cheese? You put in rennet. And the Chazal speak about rennet. It's not made artificially. Rennet is from the intestines of an animal. And of course, all of us know that the intestines of an animal is fleischiks. Fleischiks and milchiks is treif, it's basa b'chalav, basa b'hanah. Yet you put rennet into milk and it's kosher cheese. Why? Because you put the rennet into the milk. Says the Rabbi, this rennet is going to create the cheese. It's going to separate what's good from what's bad, and he's going to add flavor. In other words, not only is the cheese going to be created by separating what is necessary and useful from the milk from what is not necessary and not useful from the milk, but after the separation is complete, the cheese is going to come away also with more taste. And yet, none of that taste is the rennet itself. Says the Rebbe, hatam shel keva. The flavor of the rennet in a nimtza v'nirgesh is not present and felt, not in the cheese, not in anything else. In other words, rennet is serving a purpose. It's affecting cheese, and at the same time, none of it is in the cheese. Who pay a lot better? There's the rennet that affects this clarity. You separate what's good from what's bad, and you give it greater taste and greater richness and greater pleasure and so on and so forth. So the point is, rennet is acting as a catalyst. It affects something, but remains removed from the thing that's affecting. He's using this as a metaphor for salt. Salt creates clarity, but salt's not a part of the clarifying process. It's invested in the clarifying process, because if there wouldn't be salt, if there wouldn't be chokhmah, there wouldn't be clarity. But the clarity does not involve the salt itself. Continues the Rebbe on line 22, the same is true. When we talk about chokhmah creating clarity, says the Holy Rebbe, it separates what needs to be disentangled. In other words, to separate what's good from what's evil. Before the good and the evil were interwoven, mixed together, entangled. And because they're entangled, the good's full richness is not able to emerge. The good within the bad doesn't have sufficient taste. But the chokhmah creates clarity, separating the good from the bad. It separates out what is waste and byproduct, and leaves you with the rich, pure, good component, what you want, then the full significance and value and taste and pleasure that this food gives emerges. So just like rennet, salt has a similar effect, and yet the salt is not a part of that flavor at all. Line 24, which explains the concept of salt. Using a halachic analogy, salt takes blood out of the meat. It extracts this blood which is not kosher from the meat which is kosher, and it allows us to make the meat edible. So the salt is separating the tray from the kosher, the blood from the meat, but we're not eating salt, we're eating meat. First of all, it comes from the gvuras of Abba, which we explained the first idea. What is the significance? What is the Abba? It's the preserver, it's the keeper. It doesn't let you go astray. And then it says, the B'chokhmah is Beriru, which is the second idea. Not only does salt preserve and keep. It creates clarity. It separates good from bad, although it itself is not going to be a part of the good that's going to emerge from that separation. The bottom line is that it by itself has no flavor. It gives flavor to the meat. You put cheese through the process. The cheese is created by what is produced is very tasty and very, very wonderful, but you don't have in the cheese the flavor of the things that cause these changes to take place. So you have a mushel of salt. And the mushel of salt has two aspects. It keeps things honest and it clarifies everything. It doesn't allow you to fall where you shouldn't go, and it separates things. And in spite of the incredibly important role that salt has in the final product, the salt is invisible. It's not there. Because it's affecting so many things, but it's affecting so many things in an indirect way, in a removed way. And the Rebbe says on line 28, the mystical properties of salt, which are gvuras of chokhmah, which keep and give clarity, is butzina de kardanisa. Butzina de kardanisa is a high level in keser, which essentially means a darkness which is higher than visible light, that keeps things clear. Shubachin is kav amida, measures everything. But kav amida could mean understood in two ways. Number one, kav amida means it's a measured line. And kav amida could mean the kav itself is not measured, but it gives measure to many other things. And that's the connotation here. Butzina de kardanisa means it doesn't have a measure, but it measures everything else. That's gevuras of Abba. Kimelach begimatria mazla. The word melach, which means salt, is gematria is mazal. And what is mazal? Keser. V'abba yenik mazal chokhmah comes from keser. V'sheidish mazal is b'mechin stimoy. The source of chokhmah and the mazal of chokhmah is from chokhmah stibah. Shbei belubash gvuras atik yemin, which have the gvuras of atik. Shenikrayim butzina de kardanisa. This is a lot of fancy levels. This idea is discussed in many Maamar Chassidus, an incredibly great arichas. This topic is found in a lot of places in Hemshech Hayim Beis. When he talks about Keteda, somebody talks about Mon in the second Kerach. The idea is that it's something called the essence of godliness. The essence of godliness doesn't need a container or a vessel to keep it right. It keeps itself right in essence because it's an essence of clarity. That's what Gvuras of Atika Kadisha mean in Butzina de Kardanisa, and Tala de Bedulcho, which is used in conjunction with the Mon, and so forth. That's the property of Chokhmah. Chokhmah is honest and clear, not because something is protecting it from being dishonest and not clear, but because it's an essence of honesty and clarity. So it's able to impose that honesty and that clarity on everything else. And the everything else is flavored by the Chokhmah, and the Chokhmah itself isn't present there. Says the Rebbe, the idea of this kavamida, who made it, that gives measurement to all other things that are going to be limited, light and vessels. How much it should be. But the kavamida itself is not a midah, it's not measured. Which is why the halacha is. And the minig is that whenever you serve food, you put salt on the table. You put salt on the table because the shulchan is deim the mizbeach, just like on the mizbeach there was salt, so on your table there is also salt. But it gives a slightly different reason, because salt represents preserving and clear. We should know what we're doing and why we're doing it. To protect us from things that can cause us pain. Salt represents the source of all gevura. Is able to sweeten judgment. The true idea of sweetening judgment is from judgment itself. To explain this in plain English, what is judgment? Judgment means that I'm not allowed to have something. Judgment means that I'm deprived of something. Something is not being made available to me, right? So what is judgment really? Judgment is really blockage. Judgment is really a lack of access. Judgment really means that there's something which is creating obstructions that keeps me from having what I need and what I want. Why? Why are there these blockages? What is preventing me from keeping? And the answer, of course, is entanglement. Taruvis. When you make a mishmash, you make a confusion. For a while it's fun and it's exciting and it's good. But in the final analysis, it produces an enormous amount of waste. And it makes things confused. There's no clarity. And there's no clarity. In the end, you don't have what you need. Ein hagvuras nimtakim, the gevura, which is a symptom of an entanglement and a confusion, nimtakin ela b'shashan. Bring real gevura into the mix. A real gevura is not deprivation. Real gevura is not holding back. It's not punishing and being mean. It's keeping honest and making clear. And those gevuras sweeten the gevuras of ishtalshus because they're the exact opposite. The gevuras of ishtalshus means I can't have something because I blocked all my channels. In my desire for everything, I entangled myself. I got myself all tied up in knots. The gevura, in its shadish, disentangles these knots and it keeps things honest and clear. Now line 34. All of this was an analysis of salt. And quite interesting. It says the Rebbe everything we just discussed about salt, both in terms of salt keeping, gvuras of Abba, and in salt making clear, b'chochmes beridu is now going to be applied to Torah. Shebechinas chochmas haKabbalah gamkin bechinas hamelech. Kabbalah is to Torah what salt is to food. And you should know that, of course, our Rebbe, the Rebbe, and his father Rabbi Leivik corresponded for all the years that the Rebbe was out of Russia. And Rabbi Leivik was home in Yekaterinslav, which is more than a decade. And we have all Rabbi Leivik's letters. They're published because the Rebbe had them, the Rebbe kept them. What we don't have is the letters the Rebbe sent to his father that his father was responding to. So in other words, we don't know what the Rebbe wrote to his father, we know what his father writes back. And there were occasions where his father would quote or reference things that the Rebbe had written to him. The Rebbe had written to his father, a big inyan in Nigla, and he asked his father for an opinion. And Rabbi Leivik said to him, it's a very good essay, it's a good lomdus, it's a good pilpul. However, any time you discuss Nigla de Torah and you want to make sure it's correct, you have to see how it aligns with Chachmas HaKabbalah. Because if it's consistent with Kabbalah, then you know it's true. If it's not consistent with Kabbalah, you know that there's a mistake. In other words, the Kabbalah is not part of the lumdus, but it'll keep the lumdus true. So the Rebbe says, Kabbalah is to Torah like salt is to food. It's always mysterious. It's always hidden. In other words, it's never fully understood. As we understand Nigla. Understand what the Rebbe is saying. The Rebbe is not saying we don't know Kabbalah because we don't learn it. He's saying if we learned Kabbalah and dedicated our entire lives to learning and understanding Kabbalah, it would never be understood the way Nigla is understood. It would never be revealed. It would always be elusive and a mystery. I learn, I understand. I don't know what I'm talking about. And ironically, this Chochmas HaKabbalah, which is the innermost dimension of the Torah, it's the secret and mystery of the Torah. I'm sorry, and I never fully understand it, but it keeps and preserves the lower levels of the Torah. HaMelach hu haneisen ta'am b'chol ha'macholim. It sweetens and gives taste and flavor to all the other foods, gam b'lechem and gam b'basar, which also in bread and also in meat. In other words, shekol hanogas ha'elam es v'al-pi pnimiyas ha'Torah. The way we live our lives, where Hashem governs the world, in other words, the Nigla de Torah, which is how we live and how the Eibush that governs His world gets its flavor from Kabbalah. It's all based on Kabbalah. What the Rebbe is trying to say, in other words, is you learn Torah and you practice mitzvahs and you study Kabbalah, your Yiddishkeit becomes sweet. The taste of your Yiddishkeit is not Kabbalah. The taste of Yiddishkeit is the Nigla de Torah. But what brings that flavor out is the salt. So you learn Pnimiyas HaTorah Kabbalah. It creates in you a frustration, a libedeg b'kirbei, so it keeps you honest, and it brings clarity into your living as a Jew in terms of the nigel that you learn and the Torah mitzvahs that you practice and the minhagim that you conform to and so forth and so on, and it gives it richness. And the irony is, the Kabbalah itself you never enjoy, but the Kabbalah brings enjoyment to everything else. Says the Rebbe, v'chein gam ba'adam eisik b'teira, okay, the same is true when one studies Torah. Just like salt gives flavor to the bread and the meat, although you don't taste the salt itself, similarly, the Torah that we learn is enriched through the Chochmas HaKabbalah, although in the Torah we're learning the Kabbalah is not present. What the Pasuk says, Kulam b'Chochmasis. And then the Rebbe says, just like it's true in Torah, it's true in Avodah. When a person brings a sacrifice, and sacrifice represents Avodah, it's written also, Velo Sashbis Melach, there must always be salt, because salt keeps the Avodas Hashem honest, and salt keeps the Avodas Hashem clear. The Chochmah, the salt, represents the clarity. The whole point of bringing a carbon is to have this clarity of Nefesh Bahamas V'chuli. So because you have salt with the carbon, the salt is not part of the animal. The salt is not part of the final product, which means the bin birud animal, the animal which has been separated and elevated. Because it's meat. But the salt gave the koyach for it. In other words, we eat the meat from a carbon. The kohen eat the meat from the carbon. The Eibishter eat the meat from the carbon, and it has an aliyah. The salt creates the koyach for this clarity, although in the clarified, the salt is not revealed. And the Rebbe says, V'nikra melach bris. Salt is called a covenant. And the Rebbe interprets what is the meaning of the word covenant here. Bris is kashas aberiyim and Evrayim. It's the covenant of the bond between the Creator and the creation. And what this means, in other words, is the irrational or the unchangeable connection between ourselves and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is called the bris. That connection is with Chochmah. The idea that we're connected to Hashem and that connection can never be broken is not from Bina, because reason can always be unreasoned. It's from Chochmah. It's a clarity and it's a honesty. Like I explained to you earlier, that's not something that you develop, that's innate. If you have to develop an honesty, you have to develop a clarity, that's not real honesty, not real clarity. The true concept of honesty, the true concept of clarity is Chochmah, and specifically because in Chochmah you have Chochmah Stimon, and Chochmah Stimon you have Gvur Zavatika Kadisha, and higher and higher and higher. It's an honesty and a clarity which is B'etzem. Honest and B'etzem. Clear, and therefore it creates honesty and clarity in everything else. So this is the Maamar. That's it, we're done. A Maamar on Kabbalah. And it puts Kabbalah in a unique place. He admits that Kabbalah is not something you're going to really enjoy. It's not your Yiddishkeit. But Kabbalah is something which is going to bring enjoyment to all of you. It's going to change it completely. Now, of course, I'm imagining that some of you are thinking what I'm thinking. And that is, where does Chassidus fit into this scheme? Is Chassidus the same as Kabbalah? Is Chassidus also something which gives you no pleasure, but it allows you to have pleasure in all aspects of Yiddishkeit? It's a great question, I think. And of course, I do not know the answer to this question. But I do want to tell you a word, which I've told you before, because I believe that Chassidus is different than Kabbalah. Or if I may use other words, Chassidus is the combination of the salt property of Chochmah and the meat and bread property of the revealed Chalakah and Torah. In other words, in Chassidus, the preserver and the preserved become one and the same. The Mavarer and the Mizbarer are one and the same. In Chassidus, it's not salt flavoring meat, it's the salt of the meat as one. That's my sense. And I say that precisely because I don't know this as a matter of fact, this is my sense. When Dr. Zalman got married, it was still 1951. And his son, Hagat Seichel, and when his father had passed away and he made a biography of his father, he took the sichos that the Rebbe spoke at his father's Kabbalah's Ponim, annotated them, sent them into the Rebbe edited them. So they're printed in Teldet of Ramah Baharayfa, they're also printed in the Yisafas of Likutei Torah Chelik Lamed. And it could be that they're also in the Sefer Makadosh Yisrael. But the Rebbe spoke 2 long sichos about Mesiras Nefesh. 2 long sichos, very long sichos. Now, at the very end of the sicha, there's a short exchange between the Rebbe and 2 Rabbonim. The Kala, Mrs. Elixon Aleh Shalom, was not from a Lubavitcher home, and she, of course, came with her community people, with her Rabbonim. And there was a short exchange between the Rebbe and these Rabbonim. They were Yekish Rabbonim, Germanic Rabbonim. And the Rebbe talked to them about learning Chassidus, and one of them told the Rebbe, Ich lerne nur Nigla, ich lerne nicht kein Nister. I learn only Nigla, I don't learn Nister. So the Rebbe said to him, Weil du lernst dem nicht, ist nister. You know why nister is nister? Because you don't learn it. Implying that if you would learn it, it would become nigle. This is the word. That's it. Atkan. This is incredibly powerful. I'll tell you why. Because by Kabbalah, you say exactly the opposite. By Kabbalah, you say even after you finish learning it, it's still nister. You never understand it. The Rebbe is trying to tell this Yid, Chassidus is not Kabbalah. Kabbalah is take emes, it's nister. But the nature of the nister of Kabbalah is as much as you learn it, it's going to remain benister. Chassidus is only nister when you don't learn it. When you learn it, it becomes nigle. Because Chassidus is take the salt, it's the preservative, and it's the clarity. But it's not a preservative and a clarity that gives flavor. But itself is not tasted, it gives flavor, and it itself is the food that you're tasting. Because in Chassidus you also have the richness, the oyer, which is the geschmack and the flavor of Yiddishkeit. This is my personal opinion, and I'm sharing it. So this is the Maamar about Kabbalah. Kabbalah as opposed to other parts of Torah, and perhaps even Kabbalah as opposed to Torah's HaChassidus.